We talk a lot about how we can only take the kids we love as far as we've gone ourselves. That's true for every one of us. So wherever my limitations lie, and there are many, unless I attend to those things, it's back to the wisdom of those great old words of, whatever we don't transform, we just transfer. And I've seen an abundance of evidence of that in the work I do. And I think
I'm sure
what a gift we have to offer to kids, that there is a context with great men like the two of you where I can unpack my story and I can begin to transform those things so that I don't just hand those over. And I think back to some of your words, I can get really good at saying I'm sorry. I've had a conversation with all three of my kids who are in their mid-20s and counseling of their own to say, I want you to tell me when it's time for me to sit down in conversation with you at a coffee shop, to come into one of your sessions and begin to own the ways that I hurt you. Wow. I want to know when that time is right for you, and I'm ready. I'm ready. And I want to sit and I want to listen and I want to learn and I want to understand more about the things that I missed. Not because I wasn't paying attention. I was trying to pay attention, but I was living the reality that all three of us know as fathers, despite my best intentions, I'm going to harm the people that I love the most in this world. But if I can learn to say, I'm sorry, and if I can sit and listen to how I've harmed you at times when I was aware that was happening, at times when I wasn't aware, that's where redemption can start.
Welcome to 3%. We're your hosts, Jamie Haigh.
And I'm Blake Roberts.
We're two best friends, fathers, husbands, and just two guys trying to figure it out.
We're also therapists, which is probably a pretty important part.
That's true.
And we believe that at our best, people are 97% honest with themselves and others. And it's that hidden 3% of emotions, needs, desires, and behaviors that we keep to ourselves that keep us bound to shame and loneliness, from which many of our issues stem.
Each week on this podcast, we'll interview leaders in the fields of psychology, theology, arts, and athletics to explore holistic masculinity. We're not here to tell you the man you need to be, but we are here to help you explore what gets in the way of being the man you want to be.
We're going to help you develop courage and give you the tools to share your 3% in the relationships that matter most, so you can more deeply connect with yourself, God, and others. So, pull up a chair.
Let's get into it.
So let's be honest. Let's be honest. Let's be honest.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the 3% Podcast. And if you have already seen the name of the guest we have on today and you're from Nashville, then, and maybe you don't even have to be from Nashville, you know how special of a guest this is today. We have maybe I'll call him the mayor of the famous Little Yellow House. We have David Thomas, who is the co-executive director of Daystar Counseling in Nashville. And if you're not from the area, Daystar is it's just the place that you know about. I mean, my wife grew up here and she didn't actually go to Daystar. I said that in a previous episode, and she was like, I grew up going to counseling, but I didn't actually go to Daystar. It's like, I need a fact check next time. However, a lot of other people in the area that have grown up here, and not even that live here, that come here and send their kids to Daystar, and they have fantastic counselors there, and it's kind of like the place that you want your kids to go because they're in such good care there. David is I would say first, if you have kids or if you want to have kids, what do I say, Jamie? You better
buckle up.
You better buckle up today because this is going to be really rich. David is the author of 10 books, including his most recent, Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. David is a frequent media guest and speaker, spoken to hundreds of thousands in person and millions, and we were looking this up, over 11 million on the very popular Raising Boys and Girls podcast, which is just a wealth of knowledge. I mean, I've sent that to so many friends, so many clients. You guys do an amazing job at providing really practical advice and tools for parents to navigate parenting, especially in a day-to-day that is really encouraging. And David's got a new children's book coming out. And so we're going to talk about that. And we're just really, really excited and really honored for you to be joining us today, David.
I am honored to be in conversation with the two of you, and I am such a fan of what you're doing. And you're about 30 years late in starting this podcast. I do want
Oh,
to
yeah.
let you know that. But would have I would have given anything to have had your voices in my ear and pivotal moments of life. And so I get excited thinking about the men who are engaging this content and the women who are learning about what it's like to live in our skin. I think you are giving such a great gift to a lot of women as well in the conversations you're sharing. So thanks for having me. Huge fan of you both and honored to be with you this morning.
Thank you, David. I'm just going to sit in that for a minute. That's so kind.
So on this show, we talk a lot about, I guess, the two words that are kind of our, our pillars are like vulnerability and honesty. And particularly the 3% of those things, which is like letting people know all of who you are. And I was thinking about that on the way here this morning, because I know we're going to focus mostly on parenting and talk about your book. A question that I had just to kind of kick us off is how, I don't know, this could go many directions, but how do you see the importance of vulnerability and honesty in, I don't even know how to frame it, in the, as like important pillars, particularly in parenting and in raising kids that feel safe with us?
You landed that plane. That was nice.
Okay, thanks.
Great question. And, Blake, I say the first thing that comes to mind is I talk so often with parents about we're living in a particular moment where I think we have access to more information, more resources than any other time in history. And there are a lot of voices speaking to us in a lot of directions. And I think it's easy to defer to those voices a lot. I talk with parents about the wisdom of just trusting your gut and how I think that's never been harder than right now to do. And I think what happens with all of that taking place in the way it is that not only do I stop trusting my gut, but I defer to a lot of other voices in terms of teaching my kids and training my kids, and whether that's their spiritual development, their emotional development. And I think parents have always been and will always be, I think, the primary teachers. The opportunity that kids have to sit front row to the adults that they know the best, are in closest proximity to, and where all kinds of great learning can happen. And I certainly talk about it within my work about what it's like for parents just in the everyday to narrate their experience in honest, vulnerable, obviously age-appropriate ways that I think preview for kids what it looks like to be a grown-up in this world, and what it looks like to be a person of faith, what it looks like to be a man who believes in Jesus and is deeply confused by things that happen around me at times. I just last week had the great privilege of being at the remembrance service with the Covenant families, and we at Daystar have done a lot of work with those families since that tragedy. And to sit in the center of that story again and to have been so grieved and so confused about why it happened and all the parts and pieces that I think every one of us experience living in this community. And my kids, two of my kids were home some. I have young adult children, and two of them were home when that tragedy took place, and to have conversations with them about what it was like to navigate all of that personally and professionally at that point. So I think that's a long answer to your really thoughtful short question in just saying I don't ever want parents to miss that opportunity, because I think there is so much good that happens. I would argue as much learning could happen for kids around the dinner table at night as may have happened in the 7 hours at school during the day if we take advantage of it.
Yeah, and that's like the key part, if we take advantage of it, if we're intentional with it, because especially I'm thinking of a lot of like particularly a lot of dads that listen to our show that have demanding jobs, and not that, there are women that listen to the show that have demanding jobs too. And just like how we can get to the end of a day, I'll even just speak for myself, and I'm like toast when
Right.
I get home. And even like taking 5 minutes before I walk into the door to breathe and pray and switch gears before I walk into the house is really helpful, and I can feel it when I don't. And yet like those conversations around the dinner table take so much intentionality and being able to like work through our own stuff so that we can bring it in, like you said, age appropriately, but also be able to set it aside, and so that we can be there for our kids.
Yeah, knowing what's in our own stories so it doesn't come out on our
Yeah.
children. I was even talking to my wife about that this morning, of just becoming afraid that the things that hurt me the most are the things I revert back to when I'm frustrated with my son, who's 3.5, and at times right now can be really difficult. That feels like an understatement, but it feels like he can be so difficult at times. And when he's difficult, noticing in myself how I elevate to him and maybe past him because of my own wounds. And I was just expressing to her that I'm afraid that I'm doing that too much lately, and what it's doing to him, or doing it at all. And she was reminding me that something that I had said to her when she had expressed the similar fear to me, which is, we have the opportunity as parents to acknowledge what's going on in us, and we have the greatest gift that we can give our kids is an apology.
Yes.
And to come back and say, hey, I noticed this in me, and I'm not proud of that. And I'm sorry. And I'm listening to you talk, and I'm like, oh man, if I could sit in how, like, all of that energy that I get when I'm frustrated with my son is wanting him to be kind of in line, in my control, but also successful. And also I want him to learn things. And then I get even more controlling. And if I could just sit in, like, I also want you to feel, most of all, that you are deeply loved by me, and that I'm just a safe place, period. Then I don't really care if you learn how to be successful in the way I think you should.
Oh,
Yes. Well, and I think to the wisdom of the stories that both of you just told, how few adults in this world, the three of us know this in the work we do, grew up in homes where they had parents who did say, I'm sorry, who owned their stuff and cleaned up their side of the street, and all the things that we know are needed and necessary. And I was thinking too, Blake, to the story you told, how few adults, I would argue boys in particular, ever heard their dad say, you know what, I felt really overwhelmed today and decided before I came in the house, I was going to breathe for 1 minute and then pray and ask God to help me. I mean, that modeling, knowing that, kids are primarily experiential learners, and they're making the very best connections when they get to, as we were discussing, just sit front row and watch these things on the grown-ups they trust the most. Watch them apologizing. Watch them talk about what it looks like to regulate themselves. So
Yeah.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when we Daniel Tiger it together and take a deep breath and count to 4, it's a lot easier to talk to my son after that than if I keep escalating.
Yeah.
Going, no, you listen.
Yes.
And he's like, I have no ability to listen to you right now. I'm swirling in emotion and actually have no frontal lobe. So good luck, man.
David, I think this is right now is a good segue to like talk about the book a little bit, the new children's book that's coming out. Because as I was going through even some of the questions, am I right? I haven't had the book in front of me yet, but am I right that you write about your father sort of in the book?
I do.
Okay,
And
so as we're talking about being a dad and like maybe tell us real quick a little bit about what this book is and what it's for, and then I'm just curious to hear as much as you want to share, because I think story is always really helpful more than facts, right? To
Yeah.
hear a little bit about
yes.
your relationship with your dad, and then even what I mean, you've written a lot of books, but particularly what the impact was for you about writing about your own father in this new children's book.
I'd love to. Thank you. Well, I would say first, the desire to write this book came from you were so kind to mention a few minutes ago my book, Raising Emotionally Strong Boys. And when I put that book out, I actually wrote a workbook for 6 to 12-year-old boys that goes with it so that parents could be traveling through that content themselves. And then with the workbook, boys could be traveling through that content with them. And they could
cool.
hopefully be having some common conversations. And the workbook invites boys into a lot of practices, a lot of experiential. And so, I've read a lot of books that I loved the idea. I loved the concept, but I couldn't always figure out how to execute it. And it was really important to me to write a parenting book that felt really user-friendly and practical. And the workbook was just one more tool of how could I put feet to this content. And I have found over the years that I do a lot of consultations. Jamie, interestingly to hear you talk about 3.5, I do a lot of consultations with parents of kids in the 3 to 5 space. And I think 3 to 4 is, in my experience, a complicated stretch of development for boys. We could have a whole conversation about why that is. And so I end up sitting with a lot of parents who are scratching their heads and struggling some in how to best support kids in that space, boys in particular. And so it got me thinking about what kind of tool or resource could I offer to kids in that space so that we could do some of what I hope to accomplish in the workbook in the 6 to 12 space. Let's get going in the 3 to 6 space. And so
Cool.
I have long loved children's books. I think they tell some of the best truths. I think they tell some of the best stories. And I've learned as much from reading children's books. I have more memories of weeping in reading those stories with my children, my own children. Some that were stories that were familiar to me as a kid that I had just forgotten until I got to revisit the story and the content with them. And so I love children's books. I've kind of always wanted to write one, but I think was afraid to say that out loud. And so as this idea kept stirring in me, I just had a conversation with my editor about the content, and thankfully my team was just super excited. And we use in our practice at Daystar therapy dogs. We have for decades, and we currently have 6 on staff. And one of the therapy dogs who'd been a part of our practice over the last years was a yellow lab that I own named Owen, and the story is about Owen. And so the children's book series we're working with is called the Daystar Dogs, and each dog is going to tell a story and teach kids something. So we're releasing,
awesome.
are releasing 2 in May and 2 in November, and then hoping we get the opportunity to write a few more maybe in the future. But to your kind question about my dad, Owen's story intersects with my dad's story as well, in that I would first say about my dad that he was the best man in my wedding and is the best man that I know. And I don't ever want to take for granted the joy of getting to say that out loud, because I'm acutely aware that that is not the story for a lot of adult men in this world. And so I'm overwhelmed when I think about what he offered me as a boy. I'm overwhelmed by the fact that he's still alive at 81, and I get to continue to share a relationship with him. And we lost my mom to cancer in 2017, and my dad lived out of town, and we moved him here to Nashville. And he and my mom were a huge part of my kids' lives growing up, and he became even more a part of their lives in moving in closer proximity to us. And so as this therapy dog that I was working with in my practice during the days got older, it got a little bit harder for him to do full days at my office. And it was around the time that my dad moved here. And so I said to my wife one day, I think some of the good work Owen's been doing in my space with kids, he can't go up and down the stairs. I have an office on the second floor. Can't go up and down the stairs as easily. He can't chase as many tennis balls with kids as he did for 10 years. I think some of his work in the later years is going to be with my dad, who was a boy who was healing as well. And so he began to spend a lot of afternoons with my dad, and they would go on long walks. And my dad began to say to me what I have heard a lot of kids say to me over the years, which is, I am talking to that sweet dog a lot. I could tell you how many kids over the years have said some version of that to me. Like, I tell my dog things that I don't tell other people, and I love that. It's one of the thousands of reasons I think pets play a really profound purpose in all our lives. And I said, Dad, he's hands down the best listener I know in this world. Like, he never corrects my feelings. He never judges my thoughts. Like, they're just, we could learn so much from the way
He's always excited to see you.
Exactly. 100% of the time, forgives me immediately, thoroughly, all the things that we could learn from dogs. And so my dad, following that declaration, just began to tell more and more stories of what he was experiencing through this dog. And I could weep thinking about all the different lives that dog touched, mine included, throughout his journey. And to think that he served, boys from 7 to 70 over the course of his good work. And so the story is kind of the journey of, us picking him up as a puppy and him becoming a therapy dog. And he had a lot of fear. Owen had a lot of fear. The three of us were just talking about living through storms last night, and I have 1,000 memories. He wasn't a perfect dog. I have 1,000 memories of him in the middle of a storm, standing over me, panting frantically. He hated thunder and lightning. So grateful he's not living through that anymore, and yet miss him terribly. And so it's kind of the progression of all the ways that he stepped into this work, things he learned along the way, things he taught me, which was certainly more of what happened than me teaching him. And so it was a really sweet experience to write this story. And my great hope is that it's helpful. What we've done with all of the children's books is we put a tool, an emotional tool, in the back of every book. So there's a feelings chart in the back of this book. And then my colleague and friend Sissy Goff wrote a book about a therapy dog she had that she since lost. And there is a thermometer in the back of the book, which helps kids in scaling their experience to figure out what's a 2 event in life and what's a 10 event in life. And so
good.
With each book, we are offering a tool that we hope parents can use with really young kids, just to lay that foundation that the three of us know is game changing. And, I would lastly just say, if I think about the mission of that book, I think a lot about that Frederick Douglass quote of, it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. And I would say, if I had to summarize my mission in that writing, that would really be it, because the three of us have sat with we've sat in the center of a lot of broken stories, and men who didn't have a parent to walk with them and develop the foundational skills that all three of us know are just necessary to be in this world. And so I love the idea of starting early, and I love the idea of, I also think about that famous Desmond Tutu quote that I love. There comes a point where we need to stop pulling people out of the river, and we need to go upstream and figure out why they're falling in. And so I think the mission of this book was really connected to those things. So thanks for letting me talk about it.
Oh my goodness, David. I feel like, one, listening to you talk about everything that went into this children's book, it's this really broad, deeply emotional, deeply personal story. And yet all of that emotion I make up without having gotten to read it yet. That's displayed in this, what we would probably consider a more simple form. But we were even talking to my cousin Jasmine Mullen, and she is a children's, a middle grade book writer. Book writer. She's a writer.
Author.
She's an author. Thank you.
The word is author.
The word. Yeah. We're having a good time.
She puts words on a page.
Yeah, she does. She's a middle grade author. And we were talking to her about how conveying these ideas that we make gratuitous is the way that she described it. These ideas that we make gratuitous, really complicated emotional ideas, distilling them down to the form where you can communicate everything that you felt in gratitude of Owen for his work in yourself, in these kids, with your dad, and what his own work of becoming the therapy dog that could do that. And putting that in a form for children makes it so digestible for everybody. And I think that's so beautiful. And I'm sitting here just marinating in that quote of, it's easier to develop strong children than to, what was the end of it?
I think it said
Repair broken men.
Repair broken men.
Repair broken men,
Yeah.
Frederick Douglass. I'm just thinking, man, like, what a gift you're giving. I'm waiting for May to come to get this book, because I know already, talking about it, my son's going to love it. And there's nothing my son loves more than to memorize the books we read so that he can, quote, read them to me. And there's nothing I would love more than for him to have memorized a book about courage and being empathetic. And oh my goodness. I have no question there. I'm just sitting in it.
You're so kind to say that. Thank you. Thank you. I will only say that the middle part of the book theme is really about resilience and wanting to teach kids that, that classic understanding that the three of us have, that, the context for me building courage and grit and resilience is when I feel the most afraid and overwhelmed. And we work really hard to avoid fear rather than seeing that as the fertile ground for building good things. And I tell this great story about, and it's so funny. I wanted kids to be able to laugh in parts of the story. I hope they will. But when I had gone through this whole process, and the process of training a therapy dog, it's long, it's kind of expensive, and you invest all this time and this process, and then you sign up to be in some space where you can do the work. And I had known that I really wanted to do work at Vanderbilt Children's Hospital. I have great respect for that place and a lot of people there. I have a lot of friends who work there. And so we had gone through kind of a second long process that's required just to be in that particular space, as opposed to being in a school or a different context. And so I bring him in for the very first visit. And, as will be the case in a children's hospital, there are a lot of people in white coats, and they're pushing machines, and there are a lot of things beeping and buzzing. And he was paralyzed, could not walk forward into a room. And I thought, my first thought was, are you kidding me that we have been through all of this?
Right.
We've expended all this time and money and practice to get here, and you can't even do the work, And he literally started backing up. And there was a little boy on a bed who was motioning for him, wanted him to come in the room so bad. And I had to pick that 70-pound dog up and walk him and carry him into the room and put him on the edge of the bed. And he was desperate to be with this boy, but he was overwhelmed by what was required to get in the space and all of what was going on around him. And that, to me, is something I wanted to communicate to kids, of just every one of us knows that moment, feeling overwhelmed and wanting to be courageous and walking backwards more than walking forward. So I've had a couple of opportunities to get to read the book out loud to some kids, and it's so fun. They just can't help but laugh at the thought of me carrying a 70-pound dog in a room, and His limbs are just hanging off all around me at this point.
Right.
But that what would have happened had he not had the courage to go into that space would have missed the magic of what happened when he encountered this extraordinary little boy who needed him, and Owen needed the boy every bit as much too. My dad needed the dog. The dog needed my dad in those years. And so, I think there's some obviously bigger themes, but you are so kind. Thanks for letting me go on and on about it.
Yeah, this is so good. It's so good. And like, it makes me think of that image of the dog and being afraid to go in and miss the thought of him missing out on what he could have experienced. This idea that, like, I'm not here yet, but I imagine that part of raising strong children is being able to hold space to teach them, like, it's okay to be scared, and you can still do something scared. There's so much like language around this could be a whole conversation too, but like, especially us that have grown up in the church, we've all heard at some point the Bible says, do not fear 365 times. It's enough for one time a day to not be scared. And so there's this misunderstanding that fear is, or miscommunication maybe, that fear is wrong, and we just need to like help kids realize that and push through it to not be afraid, but being able to hold this really delicate balance that it's okay to be scared. And like, as your dad, I'm going to be here to listen to, like, what is it like to be scared? If I'm imagining a kid being the dog, like, what is it like to think about walking into this overwhelming place and holding that space and not stopping there. But then when they get to the place where it's like, okay, and now, like, even if you're still scared, like, we can do this, and I'll be there with you.
It even points to the need, like we were saying earlier, for our listeners, the applicable part to maybe you don't even have kids yet. Maybe you want them, maybe you don't. But I still think it points to the need to know your own story, to learn where are the places that you need to develop resilience. That's what I'm thinking about for me right now. Mm-hmm. So that you can empathize with the struggle that your kid is going through to develop their own resilience. Because if I'm sitting there and I'm like, just go in the room, dude. And yet I'm not empathizing with, like, yeah, and also I was terrified to go talk to my wife about how I absolutely forgot to do what she asked me to do last night.
Oh.
And like, I'm not walking in that room either. And now I'm shouting at my son to do what I'm afraid to do myself.
Wow.
Yes.
That feels like a unfair expectation. Especially, like, I don't even know that it needs to be an expectation. I think it just probably says that we have the expectation of ourselves to do it instead of the empathy for how hard it is.
Yes. Well, and I think it brings us right back to why I love the work the two of you are doing. And that, strength is vulnerability. Strength is honesty. Strength is authenticity. And you all are inviting men and women into that over and over and over.
And it's because we've been invited into it over
Yeah.
and over and over, and saw the change that it was for us. Okay, one question that I have for you that I'm thinking about, and our listeners will be familiar with this, but we had Dan Allender on and a few weeks ago, and it was such
What
a
a
rich
great
conversation. Such a rich conversation. And as many people know, and even as you know, if you've heard the episode, Dan has a wild story with his parents in particular, a wild story if we're comparing like things that have happened, right? And so there's this contrast, and we heard a lot of feedback actually from listeners, because at one point, as he was talking about this, and he's talking about the importance of engaging your story and being aware of how your past influences your present, I realized, like, there are a lot of clients that I have, that Jamie has, I'm sure that you've had, and that don't have that quote unquote wild story, but maybe they grew up in a quote unquote good family. And so there can be a lot of resistance to acknowledge what was missed or maybe what was hurt growing up in that good family. And Dan even said some version of like, oh yeah, I have the easy story. Like it's easy to look at my story and say, oh yeah, I can totally see how when my mom was doing this, it impacted me in relationship today. So I just kind of like brought that to the awareness for the listener, and we got some really good feedback of like, I'm so glad you brought that up because I was listening to it going, I don't have that experience at all, which then just kind of adds to so my past must not really be affecting my present. Like it's just something that's wrong today. So then we're talking to you and I'm realizing like, oh, you have in some ways like the opposite end of that story, like growing up with what you're saying you had with your dad. And I know that you've also done a lot of work. We can't really do this work that we do well without doing our own work. And so Dan spoke to the person who might have grown up in a quote unquote good family and also name like what that was like and that there were other things outside of that weren't good and that's okay. I would just be curious. I don't want to get us too far off track from the book, but I don't know. I just think it would be a neat opportunity to hear you as someone who is in that other camp to speak to what I'm putting words to, if that's clear.
Oh, you are. And I had a couple of thoughts as you were talking. I think the first was leaning into your wisdom of absolutely, even for folks who grew up with good parents, whatever that might mean, there was still pain. Like none of us can escape heartache and brokenness. Like we've been guaranteed that. Now, go back and reread Romans 5, Romans 8, John 10. Like it's just all throughout Scripture. We're guaranteed we're going to grow on this side of creation in some way. And so I think to your wise question, for folks who lived in a different story, it could be easy to think I dodged a lot of pain and therefore I don't need to do a lot of digging in. And the reality being we all have a story to unpack.
Yeah.
And I was thinking too, Jamie, when you were talking a few minutes ago, you know, we talk a lot about how we can only take the kids we love as far as we've gone ourselves. That's true for every one of us. So wherever my limitations lie, and there are many, unless I attend to those things, you know, it's back to the wisdom of those great old words of, you know, whatever we don't transform, we just transfer. And I've seen an abundance of evidence of that in the work I do. And I think
I'm sure
what a gift we have to offer to kids that there is a context with great men like the two of you where I can unpack my story and I can begin to transform those things so that I don't just hand those over. And I think back to some of your words, I can get really good at saying I'm sorry. You know, I've had a conversation with all three of my kids who are, you know, in their mid-20s and counseling of their own to say, I want you to tell me when it's time for me to sit down in conversation with you at a coffee shop, to come into one of your sessions and begin to own the ways that I hurt you. And
this is you saying this to your kids.
Yeah, this is me saying to my kids, like,
wow.
I want to know when that time is right for you, and I'm ready. I'm ready. And I want to sit and I want to listen and I want to learn and I want to understand more about the things that I missed. Not because I wasn't paying attention. I was trying to pay attention, but
right.
I was living the reality that all three of us know as fathers, despite my best intentions, I'm going to harm the people that I love the most in this world. But if I can learn to say, I'm sorry, and if I can sit and listen to how I've harmed you at times when I was aware that was happening, at times when I wasn't aware, like that's where redemption can start. And the second thing I was thinking to your great question is about, it thrilled me to hear you say you'd had a conversation with Dan Allender. I could not respect that man.
Right.
Oh, gosh, I couldn't respect him or his work anymore. And I've been asked a handful of times over the years, like, okay, folks might come up at an event to our book table and say, all right, if this is overwhelming, there's several books on this table, I don't know where to start. If I were just going to pick one, and have said consistently, and I will always say, if you were only going to read one parenting book, I would not buy a book off this table. I would buy How Children Raise Parents by Dan Allender. I think that should be a required read for every parent. I wish they sent people home from the hospital with that. Like,
Wow.
it's
I haven't even read that one.
hands down my favorite book on parenting. So,
Wow.
for folks listening right now, get on Amazon, travel to your closest bookstore, and grab a copy. Like, it is.
I mean,
I
even
could
the
not
title,
recommend it highly enough.
How Children Raise Parents.
Isn't that
is like,
incredible?
oh,
Yeah. That's so
Yeah.
Dan.
yeah,
It is. It absolutely is.
He,
And it's so
he spent
rich.
our whole episode comparing his marriage to a fight over a baked potato.
Yeah.
And it just it wrecked us. It was
good.
so helpful. I mean, similar to talking to you, it feels so like you're calling him a great man and you're being really kind to us, but we're sitting here, David, you and I have never met, but you're a legend to me. Like I have lived here for, I don't know, 13 years. And before I got into counseling for myself, I knew who you were because of your impact on the community. And like I was I was saying this to David before the episode for people listening, my older brother, unrelated to us, talking about this today, was already reading your books. And so you're a gift to my family who's not even here, who has no idea that I know who you are. I mean, you are one of the people that people think of for in the same context, I think, as a Dan Allender. Like you impact lives for the better, and so we're really grateful.
Those are incredibly generous words, and I am humbled that anyone would include me in the same conversation with Dan. So thank you for that high
true.
compliment. What a
It's
great
true.
man whose life's work has impacted our world in such redemptive ways. So thank you for that.
I think what Jamie is saying is like there's two parts of it that I'm thinking of, which is A, the work that you have done on yourself, like the work that you have done on your own story. And that's typically what like I focus on a lot with people is the work on their own story, because like you mentioned earlier, a lot of the people that I'm sitting with have come from stories of significant harm within their family of origin, some in big ways, some in little ways. And so there's just a lot of like headspace and emotional space and work that requires. And so there's like your work, David, that you have personally done that have influenced or that have gotten you to this place where you have, like Jamie was just saying, have impacted so many people and like generations. And we can see people that have come from really bad, that's not a great word, really harmful stories that have like impacted the world in really positive ways. And what I'm thinking about now, which I just haven't really thought about before, in hearing you talk about your relationship with your dad, it's like making me aware of the importance of, back to your quote that you shared of Frederick, raising strong children is like not just for the children themselves and not just for me as the parent in our relationship, but like generations of people, because as you were just alluding to, like you still had stuff to work through because your family wasn't perfect, but it sounds like they did a really good job. And in some ways, I'm trying to be careful with how I talk about this, but like there may have been, you may have to help me out with this. There may have been like less work in a sense for you within the context of like your own relational trauma, if we could say that, within your family, which just created maybe more capacity to like do good in the world. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, I also think Dan said in the episode that what's the most ordinary is the most demonic. Like he said that when you're working through your story, and I think his point was if you believe that there's nothing in your story to be redeemed, then you won't do the work of redeeming your story.
Yes.
And so the fact that I think what I hear Blake saying, we do this a lot, What I hear Blake saying is that you have redeemed what may be perceived as ordinary in your story because it sounds like good parents, and good parents still leave spaces that need to be redeemed. And then you've also now transferred that to your sons in creating further redemption. I mean, I'm like tearing up when you're talking to us about, I've already talked to my sons about wanting to make a space so that I can care for the wounds in their stories I didn't know existed.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
That's more valuable than having $100,000 saved for them for school. Like that's what is going to make like future generations rich.
Yeah.
Is that type of relational intention, and not that focusing on providing for their future is wrong, but like we need to focus on providing a whole different thing for their future, which is exactly what he just said you're offering for your kids.
A holistic future. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I was thinking as you were both talking, so Jamie, I don't know your Enneagram number. I do for Blake because we had a brief conversation about it when we were together last. But I'm a 1 on the Enneagram.
Okay.
And my Enneagram teacher once said, I hear from adults who had a 1 parent more than any other number. And it was not hearing good things
Yeah.
for anyone listening.
Because
I hear more criticism, more ways I was hurt, more ways I didn't feel like I measured up, hit the mark, all the things, which living in this number makes perfect sense to me. Like, I'm not surprised by that, but I remember feeling in that moment like I wanted to throw up. Like, that felt so incredibly true, and thinking about all the ways I was unaware of my oneness in the context of everyday life that would have, despite my words, communicated those things to my kids, like, I am just not hitting the mark. And so I have done or wanted to do extensive work in that space because there's just so much to clean up in that space, so much to clean up. And, you know, one practical example was the deeper I got into the work, I have 3 children. My oldest is a girl, and then I have twin boys. And throughout their whole life, they shared a room together. And you all know, because we've all 3 been adolescent boys, like, adolescent boys have a very special smell to them, and they don't tend to be the best housekeepers. And, you know, one's way of seeing the world is that we see everything that's wrong, and we want to make it right. It's why we're known as the reformer or the perfectionist. And so on any given day, I could walk into their bedroom and it looked like a fraternity house, you know, and it smelled like a locker room. And so I instinctively could, you know, see dirty clothes piled up and unmade beds and, you know, all the smells and all the things. And it captured my attention the way I think it does for all ones. And so the amount of work, just even there, just starting with something as simple as that I mean, my wife one time challenged me. She's like, sweetheart, you sometimes walk in the house and you forget to greet people, you know, before you start attending to task. And I love these people. I love these people with every fiber of my being, but it's exactly what happens when your, you know, view on the world is that I see everything that's wrong. And so I'm talking about things while I'm taking out the trash or emptying the dishwasher, all those things, which in some way communicates like the task of this home carry the greatest value for me, not the people who live here. And so that's been a starting place for me in wanting to do, needing to do so much work with my own 3 children of just saying, tell me stories about times that you felt like my love was somehow connected to how much you picked up after yourself or how much you remember to do cleanup time, you know, whatever it may be. And knowing that despite my best intentions, that happened, and didn't just happen once, it happened repeatedly. And so those are the stories I want my children to tell, because I have some memories of times when it happened. But to that story I just told about my boys' room, I remember just making a decision when they were in high school, saying to my wife, I'm just not going to go in their room. Like, I love them so much, and I don't need to see it. I know what it looks like. I could describe it right now, having not been in it for 3 months. And it's like, and at the end of the day, who cares? Like, these two boys are extraordinary men. Like, if I weren't their dad, I would be vying to be friends with both of them. I'm crazy about who they are in this world. And to think that of all the goodness that's bound up in both of them, that I could get consumed with their dirty laundry, just undoes me. And so I think that's maybe one example of 1,000 I could give you, where it's like I have so much territory to explore. And to your great wise question, whether there was obvious harm that happened in my story or things that weren't paid enough attention to, that were happening subtly in the everyday, that were sending messages that I never wanted to send. So challenge, I think all three of us are wanting to give ourselves and people listening is just, let's just all be about the business of doing our work, cleaning up our side of the street.
Yes.
And thank you for modeling that so vulnerably on here. I mean,
absolutely.
I think that, being a one and being able to lean into your story, despite what I imagine felt like a lot of self-criticism.
Yes.
And then redeeming that to the point where you could extend like a hand of redemption to your kids. Man, David, I think that's I hope that's a gift to everybody listening of like, no matter if you just feel like that's the way you are, you have this way that you feel like is just the way you are. You're like, well, I don't know what to do with that. Just listen to David talk about this, because it's like, man, that is redemptive. Also, I test as a 3 or a 4 to answer your question.
Do you?
It's normally 50% one or the other. The 4 comes out in tattoos, and the 3 comes out in how I have expectations of my son.
That's so good.
Can I tell you, Jamie, what my best friend said to me one time? In the beginning, 1s and 3s can often confuse themselves.
Yes.
I have learned over the years, because we're both high achieving and performance matters and all those things. But I remember the more I read about the 3, I was so convinced that I was not a 3, but wanted desperately to be. And so I kept having conversations with my best friend, who's also a 1, and said, but don't you think, but hey, what about this? Like, I kept trying to make an argument, and he said to me,
sure.
I'll never forget him saying to me, David, you aren't charming enough to be a 3. Which is absolutely the truth. No truer
What a good
words have
friend.
been spoken. I know, what a great friend. Brother, I hear you. I know you want to be. You aren't that charming. Trust
That
me, we
is
would all know
good.
if you were a 3, and you most certainly are 1.
That's incredible.
That's
Isn't that
amazing.
great? So I'm envious of the charm and warmth you have access to. And Blake, I'm envious at your ease in the world. I'm working as hard as I can to bring up my 9 wing, because my goodness, my dad, who's the best man I know, is a 9. And I have a son who's 9. So I'm sandwiched between 2 men who embody all the goodness and peace. And certainly hear me acknowledge, I know there's a struggle side with every number, but I have a lot of envy for your number, brother.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Both
That's
of you.
Kind. That's very kind. Well, David, I wish we could just keep talking for hours.
Same.
I cannot wait for this book to come out. I can't wait to send it to our listeners. I can't wait for them to get it in their hands and to be reading it at night in their rooms with their kids, for us to be able to do it. I mean, we can just echo everything we've said. Just incredibly grateful to know you and to be a byproduct of the work that you've done, and in this area beyond the work that y'all are doing with Daystar. It's just so important, and it literally is changing like generations, like kids that, like Jamie said, that have gone through Daystar when they were younger, that maybe are now even clients of ours. You could just tell it's like you guys are like making it, and I know you have heard countless stories, but you guys are making an incredible impact. And I know you're a busy man, so just really appreciate you hanging out with us for a little bit, and really grateful to be with you.
Yeah.
Really grateful to have shared time with you both. And I meant what I said on the front side of our conversation. Gentlemen, you are doing good work in this world.
Thank you.
And you are changing lives.
Thank you.
Keep doing the good work.
Thank you.
Well, to all of our listeners, we're glad you're here. keep coming back. You're worth it.
Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode. Listen, we're working on some really practical resources to help you connect more deeply with yourself and others. So if you head over to our website, 3percentco.com, you can learn more about that. The link will be in the show notes. And this is the part of the show where we ask you for some help. Listen, we don't have a big fancy production team. We're recording these in my therapy office in between sessions and in the margins of our life. We just really believe in the message that much. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and rarely would I take the time to review and rate a show, just because honestly, I forgot. It wasn't until we started doing this show that I realized doing that actually really does help these platforms notice our show and get the word out. And so if any of this is impactful to you, we would love it if you took a second to leave us a review, rate us, or if you want to just do it the old-fashioned way, text this link to a friend and say, hey, let's talk about this episode. Whatever you do, make sure to follow us on whatever platform you're listening to so you never miss an episode. We're really grateful you're here, and we'll see you next week.
So let's be honest.